Hey there. Welcome to Write More Light. My name is Sarah Elgatia. I am the marketing and outreach person at the Midwest Writing Center, and I'm happy to be here with you live today from this Starbucks parking lot. Um, with that, yesterday was Veterans Day. Tuesday was the Marine Corps birthday, and I also found that yesterday was Kurt Vonnegut's birthday, which all jumbled around in my brain and made me think, okay, Vonnegut's birthday is Veterans Day. His most famous book is about uh, being a veteran or whatever. It definitely references World War II. And I started thinking about that, and I realized, a lot of my favorite authors are veterans, and they all do a couple of things in common. Granted, I am super, super partial to modernists. Modernism is the period of time in art that followed World War One. So the art scene was totally changed by a specific war. So that makes sense that if my favorite time period in art was a time period that specifically was responding to war, that many of my favorites would be veterans. But they're not necessarily all modernists, right? And there's a lot that we can learn from these veteran writers. And it's something I almost didn't leave the title the way it is of this video, because I didn't want it to sound like veteran authors, like people who have been authors for a long time. I mean authors who are veterans. As you may suspect, this is a niche dominated by men. I thought about going outside of the Western world for talk about this, but that makes it really complicated. There are a lot of countries in which service is mandatory for men generally, and there are a lot of countries in which I don't know, stuff could get messy if we go into it too much. Plus, as a Westerner, most of what I've read is Western, so that helps me a lot in narrowing it down. The authors and books that I have written down to talk about specifically are Tim O'Brien, The Things They Carried. Philip Levine is a poet. He died, I think, fewer than 10 years ago. Hemingway, of course. Obviously, like I said before, most of the modernists. Norman Mailer, Vonnegut, Faulkner, and Tolkien. Tolkien was one that I found sort of fun because he doesn't do any of the stuff that I generally think of. Granted, like I said, this has been a few days of thinking, and I sort of went off book for my plan for this week to do this because I got excited about it. But the things that I've noticed and loved and learned from these other veterans that I mentioned, Tolkien doesn't do them. So that's a good person to add because it breaks the rules that I invented. I will always be an advocate for copying and stealing from our favorites, so I highly recommend reading all of these people. My favorites, of course. I only included one proper poet, Philip Levine. I say proper because at least a few of them wrote poetry, but that's not what we know them for. So maybe that use of the word proper is controversial, and I apologize. I'm just going to start out with The Things They Carried. It is not a modernist book. It's written in response to the Vietnam conflict, and but it does a lot of modernist things, except it's written much later and talks about much different issues. So what the modernists did in response to World War One. World War One, of course, changed the way we think about combat and the way that we think about war. And so I'm going to do this the opposite of how I said, because it makes more sense to talk about modernism and then talk about Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried. Our our modernist artists noticed that time is different, both in the moment and after the moment, and that is specific to their military service. I think we got shell shock, which is the early name for PTSD from them, but it also goes into the way that all people experience time, which is different by individual, different by what's going on. When we're bored, time goes slowly. When we're enjoying ourselves, time goes quickly. And that's, I don't know the science of relativity, but the that is the big thing that modernism did for us, and that is spurred on, motivated by the military experience of so many of these artists. So, Faulkner and Hemingway and I'll go with Faulkner and Hemingway. I keep going off to mention non-veteran modernists because I get really excited about modernism. So once I feel like I have a better handle on modernism, we're definitely going to talk about it. It's my favorite. Anyway, so Faulkner and Hemingway, and of course, like Fitzgerald, they write time in a really funny way, and they write time in the way that they thought, of course, best illustrated how time passes, how we understand time. Hemingway's big thing is just skipping chunks of time. If nothing happened in that time that mattered to the plot, sure, but nothing that mattered in a concrete way to him, he didn't include it. But he also didn't tell you that time was passing, which is really difficult to read. It's not how we normally read. We read, generally speaking, in a linear way. The plot moves forward in time from A to B to C. And he still does that, except he skips over B. Something's going to be happening in scene 1. They're all hanging out, the main character and his 6 favorite friends and 70 people he's never met before are all hanging out at a bar. The night ends, and then you have no idea, but it's 3 months later, and they're all in the back of a truck traveling somewhere. And you figure out from context, from close reading, that time has passed. And that's difficult to read, but it's also worth reading. It's also worth studying and mimicking, because in the practice of cutting, in the practice of trying to keep your very best content, cutting out the stuff that doesn't matter is really important. I would say that it's a much nicer thing to do to let your audience know that time passed, but it's worth experimenting with for sure. Faulkner did that a little differently. He made time pass the way, and Virginia Woolf, not a veteran, because she's a woman, and also she's English, which doesn't make her less able to be a veteran. Just the other 2 I had mentioned already were American. I'm very biased toward reading American lit as an American. I don't mean to exclusively read it, but it is the majority of what I've read. Anyway, Faulkner and Virginia Woolf do something very similar in that the inner monologue of the narrator, and both of them change narrators a lot too. That's unfair. I haven't read a ton of Faulkner, but everything I have read by Faulkner has switching narrators. Anyway, so time passes inside the narration, and you have your narrator just saying what's happening as it's happening, and it's very, very confusing. But it's also really important that that we can bear witness to this very intentional stream of consciousness style. It is not stream of consciousness. It's heavily edited and revised, but it's a very different method, and something that I think that we should all really be able to steal, at least in practice. This, I'm looking at the window, I see something pass. Suddenly, you're turning your head, and there's not something that specifically happened that you're conscious of happening that causes you to turn your head. That's a really interesting use of time that we'll go into how to emulate that in a little while. So moving from the funny use of time in modernism to what I almost used the wrong name, Tim O'Brien is doing in Things They Carried. He writes in vignettes, which, I mean, truly, like, I cannot recommend The Things They Carried highly enough. It changed how I write, for sure. It's about an important cultural moment in time, and yeah, it's just wonderful writing. Beautiful, beautiful writing in a style that's different from what we're normally getting. It is listed as fiction. I'm not sure. I think it's one of those things where it's like half fiction, very, very much based on lived experience, but also still fiction. He writes in vignettes, which I think still, if you've got a one narrative that's written in vignettes, I think that still is messing with time. And I say I think because that's how I think of it. The author may appear and say, like, no, this is happening in a linear way, and I want you to experience it this way. Or maybe they're not happening in a linear way, but they're just all separate stories. So I could totally be wrong based on the piece of what we're discussing. So he writes in vignettes. He gives you these little intense scenes, but they're short. And it's just one thing happening right now, and then the next one is one thing happening right now. Granted, what's really cool about the Things They Carried is he's truly talking about what each soldier carried with them throughout their service, which is really cool. And we do a lot of we meaning fiction writers in this case do a lot of exercises surrounding, let's describe this person, let's write this character based on what is in their pocket. And what's in their pocket is 3 pennies, a stick of gum, 2 keys on a keychain that is a furry ball, and this is a very large pocket. Whatever. A lot of the times also it could be a purse, which would have many more objects in it, or a backpack, whatever. But that's an exercise I've seen and done a lot in classes. So it's almost, it's totally a novel length exercise like that, except it's specific to a moment in time, an experience. And there's so much that we can learn from the things that someone carries in their pockets. Granted, if we were doing a wallet 20 years ago, before smartphones, right, we're going to have someone's family's school pictures in there, and we're going to have a ticket stub, and we're going to have cash, and maybe their Blockbuster card, and a memento. The school pictures is really what I was going for, because we don't carry around pictures so much anymore, because they're all on our phone. Everything we need is on our phone. We're not carrying phone numbers around. I definitely, at one point in time had a little piece of paper I carried around with me that had 6 phone numbers on it in case I needed them. Also totally an excellent exercise is, get to know this character, get to know this scene based on the garbage in my back seat. That's a good one, honestly. I was at first embarrassed by just that garbage bag, but that's legitimate if we're getting to know a character or a scene or a moment in time, basing it off of the things they carried. The concept is an excellent exercise, and it can absolutely lead to an excellent piece of work that messes with time. Time is definitely the thing that I take most from the veterans listed, the way they mess with time, and we'll segue into Vonnegut with time, right? His most famous book, Slaughterhouse-Five, opens with someone being, quote, unstuck in time, which honestly I have seen a lot lately in sci-fi horror. Um, Horror, I guess, as a genre on TV. I've seen a lot of characters who are like accidental time travelers in their own bodies, not like a quantum leap. They're just suddenly in a different scene in their own life, and that's a really, really wild thing to play with. I think you have to be very, very intentional with your crafting to be successful at that. I've never tried it. Perhaps I will to go along with this accountability stuff, right? Um, but Vonnegut, of course, in a few of his books, he jumps around in time. I've read a bit of Vonnegut. I guess I've probably read more Hemingway than Vonnegut, but that's besides the point. He in Slaughterhouse-Five, of course, the opening line is Billy Pilgrim has become unstuck in time. And in that gives the author the freedom to move around as he is comfortable. Like, what scene do I want to write next? Of course, I'm sure there's a ton of cutting and pasting in the editorial process to make sure the narrative arc works. But that is something that I take advantage of when I write too. I write what, not being unstuck in time, but I write what I feel like writing right now. And I do that in vignettes. So what I'm describing, I guess, is more of a the things they carried as written by Faulkner. If Faulkner were not the talented man he is. Anyway, so moving around in time within one character, within one character's body, is something we can totally steal from Vonnegut. Something that Vonnegut does that I think he started this, or at least he was the big name that started it, is telling a third person omniscient story and then throwing yourself in, or a first person narrator suddenly exists in this third person omniscient. He always frames it as though the author is talking. I assume that whether or not the narrator is named Kurt Vonnegut, that the narrator is still a fictionalized version of Kurt Vonnegut. But that's something that adds levity. My hand is way over here, you can't see it. Adds levity to the story. It helps with his humor. I cannot tell you how to be funny. I'm not great at it. I may not even be okay at it. But Vonnegut is. And part of that is he throws in surprises. And the main surprise that I have found consistently is adding to a third person omniscient story, adding a first person narrator when it's unexpected. That breaks some tension. It surprises the reader, which is what breaks the tension, and it also brings in a more personal aspect to it. So you think that you're going along reading, I guess, a biography of, I'm still referencing Slaughterhouse-Five here. You think you're going along reading a biography of Billy Pilgrim, and then suddenly Kurt Vonnegut says, and this is where I was sitting at that time. It really, really throws you off. And it also, I think the main point of that book is documentation of something that he found really, really upsetting and terrible. And so in this moment, when he puts himself in this scene, he's also saying, this is a real thing. This is not just a novel. So it can work to both break tension and to add weight, which is a feat to do both at the same time. That's not easy. Tolkien, I have read very little by Tolkien, I will be honest with you. But I know that a lot of his work, which is fantasy, of course, the rest of these are relatively speaking, they're all realism. But a lot of what Tolkien does also deals with the passage of time. He, of course, does the classic hero journey, but in the epic way, right? It takes a long time. There are a lot of things that pass, and he wants, I imagine, he wants the audience to understand, to experience the length of time going on, which you do when you're reading his work. The time passes with intention. You know, the journey lasts a long time, and you are in it. You are part of it. So now I want to move on to how we can steal from these wonderful men, and then we'll move into our free write. I also want to say I want part of my Write More Light one line that I'm doing. Today I absolutely planned on saying this, and I don't I get a little bitter with myself when I force accountability on myself, whether or not I already intend to do it. I'm going to write in the style of one of these authors I've mentioned today, as my thing that I hope to get one line from. It's been difficult to maintain that accountability with y'all, because while I attempted to cut the pressure, right, I'm saying that I'm cheating at NaNoWriMo by only writing enough to get a line to share. Granted, a lot of the time, I've told you this before, what I'm doing is journaling until I can figure out what I'm writing. And so my first line is like, I'm writing to be accountable. So I have to write long enough to not be embarrassed. And it's really, really important, and it is keeping me accountable. I am writing every day, which I haven't done in a very long time. So today I'm going to write in the style of one of these people. It's a really important exercise to expand your abilities as a writer. I'm always going to recommend that. And I'll make a note of who and what I'm trying to write in the style of. I'm not going to promise I'm going to be effective, but I will make note of that. And I encourage you to do the same. Of course, I would love, love, love if you would post your one line of the day, so you don't have to do it for an hour. You don't have to do 500 words. You don't have to do 3 pages. Just one line. Just have to write one line. And also, like, everything sounds better out of context. That's my big secret to just sharing writing, is you can really take anything out of context and it'll sound good. So much less to be embarrassed about, much less vulnerability in reality. Okay, so ways that we can steal from these gentlemen. Obviously, I am an advocate for writing all over your books when you are excited about something, so that you know what to come back to. I know that's a sin for a lot of people, so grab your Post-it notes and, mark them however you are most comfortable. But then the things that I mentioned for each author are things that I think are totally stealable, like putting a first-person narrator into your third-person omniscient story, writing in vignettes, writing a character or scene around what someone is carrying around with them, and messing with time. So the thing that is not stream of consciousness, that feels like stream of consciousness when you read it, is it's really hard to do. And my advice on stealing in that style would be to just write down what you're thinking, not in a linear way, not in the nice way that has all the words involved, but I see, yeah, it's hard to say thoughts without making sentences out of them. I know that. I also know that a lot of people don't think in words, and a lot of people don't think in sentences or in a narrative. An inner monologue does not exist for a lot of people. So that's valid. That's the exciting thing, right? I told you I'm sitting in a Starbucks parking lot, so I might just say cloud reflection, star, my leg hurts. Whatever. I'm going to leave you with that. I just realized I can't continue to do a live, or at least I don't know how with my phone, with my timer as well, and I don't have my car on because I'm not driving. Also, I would not drive and make a live video, I promise. So that's what I want to leave you with. I want to leave you with an exercise from which to steal. I'm going to give you a list of items, and I would like you to write the character or scene or poem that comes from them. The list of items in an imaginary wallet. It's going to be one of those, it's going to be a large wallet. A photograph of a dog, a black and white dog, a photograph of a small child holding a stuffed animal, a $2 bill, a gift card to an ice cream shop, 46 cents, and a letter that ends with love and a name, and a grocery list that includes sponges, Windex, window cleaner, and grapefruit. As always, I hope that you write more light into your life. Go ahead and leave me comments. Ask for what you want out of these videos. We'll have more traditional lessons coming up. I'm gonna have some news. I'm going to have some times when I give you the news. We've got a lot coming up in November and December at the Midwest Writing Center. I'm really excited to talk to y'all about. But of course, today was not the day for that. Please, of course, like us on all the social medias. We've got a YouTube channel where we post all of these videos after they're done being live. Our username on both Twitter and Instagram is MWC_QC. And yeah, let us know what you want. We've got resources. We want to share them with you. We can do some supplemental lessons for your school. We can work on projects with you. We've got a lot of upcoming stuff, including publications. So yeah, let us know and write more light into your life.